Do you hear that? There's something walking towards us over there.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Whoa, guys. Holy. That means something that just was powerful enough that it reached multiple frequencies.
I mean, that just went straight across the entire screen.
Mireya Mayer thought she was prepared for anything. As a primatologist and fearless explorer, she spent years trekking through dense jungles, dodging predators, and even discovering new species. But deep in the Alaskan wilderness, something happened that left her shaken like never before. It started with strange sounds in the darkness. Then came the heat signatures. 4 massive figures, moving with purpose. They weren't wandering, they were watching.
Russ, I just heard something coming towards me, and all of a sudden leaves just started dropping with absolutely no wind. Have you seen anything?
Was Mireya able to escape that night? Or did she come face to face with something no one was ever meant to see? Today, we're breaking down every chilling detail of her encounter and why it raises more questions than answers about what really lurks in the wilderness. The hunt for Bigfoot begins. Welcome back to the Cryptid Report. Mireya Mayer's latest mission is taking her deep into one of the most mysterious, untouched places on Earth, the remote wilderness of Alaska. And let's be clear, this isn't some scenic nature walk. We're talking about an unforgiving, creepy landscape where legends don't just survive, they thrive. For centuries, people have whispered about massive, shadowy figures roaming these woods, towering, hairy creatures, strange noises in the dead of night, blurry photos, unsettling encounters, stories passed down through generations. It's a mystery no one has been able to crack, but Mireya is determined to get answers. Why? Because when you've built a career proving that animals people thought didn't exist are actually real, the idea of Bigfoot doesn't seem so impossible. And this time, she's not relying on folklore. She's bringing cutting-edge science to the hunt. Her team is equipped with thermal cameras to detect heat signatures, drones to scan the treetops, and motion sensors to catch whatever might be lurking just beyond sight. The goal? Simple but bold. Find real evidence. Prove Bigfoot exists, or finally put the legend to rest. But this is more than just a search for a creature. It's a deep dive into one of the greatest mysteries of all time. Now imagine stepping into this forest, towering western hemlocks closing in, the canopy so dense you can barely see the sky. Every sound is amplified. Every shadow feels like it's moving. And somewhere out there, something might be watching. This isn't the kind of forest where kids roast marshmallows by a campfire. In fact, this place feels alive in a way that sends a chill straight down your spine. The trees stretch impossibly high. The air is thick, damp, almost suffocating. And every step on the moss-covered ground, it's too quiet, like the forest itself is muffling the sound. Like it doesn't want you here. And then there's the silence. You ever find yourself holding your breath without even realizing it? That's the kind of silence we're talking about. A silence so heavy it makes your heart pound just a little harder. Even Mireya, who spent years in some of the wildest places on Earth, admits there's something different about these woods. You feel like you're constantly being watched, she says. And maybe that's because you are. The locals have their stories. Giant footprints appearing overnight. Blood-curdling screams that rip through the night air. Shadowy figures lurking just beyond the tree line, disappearing the moment you try to focus on them. But the thing is, Mireya isn't easily shaken. She stared down charging gorillas, sidestepped venomous snakes, and navigated through some of the most treacherous terrain on the planet. Her team fans out, scanning the area, setting up equipment. The plan is simple: cover as much ground as possible and hope something takes the bait. If it's out there, we're going to find it, Mireya says. But deep down, she knows they're stepping into the unknown. And if Bigfoot is really as smart as they say, it might already know they're coming. Then, just as the team started settling in, the first signs appeared. One of the team members called out from a clearing. "You're going to want to see this." When Mireya got there, her breath caught in her throat. Right in front of her, pressed into the damp soil, was a footprint. Massive, deep, and unmistakably not human. "This can't be real," someone muttered under their breath. But the evidence was right there. The sheer size, the depth of the impression, It told a different story. Whatever made this wasn't just big, it was heavy, powerful, and close.
It's no surprise that Mireya's already getting a lot of activity.
The team measured it, over 18 inches long, with deep grooves suggesting not just weight, but deliberate movement. Mireya crouched down, running her fingers along the edges, her mind racing. "This isn't just some random mark," she said. "Something walked here." The team exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes flicking toward the dense trees surrounding them. Suddenly, the forest felt different, like it was holding its breath, watching them, waiting. Then came the sound. At first, it was faint, just a twig snapping in the distance. No big deal, right? Forests are full of noise, but then, again, closer, louder, crack, snap. "Did anyone else hear that?" Ronnie, the team's survival expert, whispered. Nobody spoke. They just nodded, their faces pale. It wasn't just the snapping branches anymore. A few seconds later, from deep within the trees, came something else. A low, guttural growl. Slow, rumbling. Rolling through the forest like a warning. And this wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something else. Something they couldn't explain. Mireya felt her pulse quicken. She'd spent years in the wild, heard every kind of animal sound imaginable. Lions roaring, howler monkeys screaming. Creatures that could shake the ground with their calls. But this was different. It didn't belong to anything she'd ever encountered before. The team moved fast, switching to thermal cameras. If something was out there, this was their best chance to see it. The screen flickered to life, scanning the dense forest ahead, every second stretching unbearably long. And then, there it was. No, they were. 4 massive heat signatures, moving slowly, deliberately. Mireya kept her voice steady, but the tension in her eyes was impossible to miss. "Those aren't deer," she said quietly. They were too large, too defined, in the way they moved. It wasn't random, it was calculated, coordinated. Like they were working together. Like they were flanking the team. "Is it just me?" Ronnie whispered, his voice barely audible. "Or does it feel like they're hunting us?" No one answered, but the way they stood, motionless, watching the screen, barely breathing, said it all. Then, without warning, the figures disappeared. The team adjusted their cameras, scanning the area again, trying to relocate the heat signatures. But there was nothing. Mireya stared at the screen, shaking her head. "That's impossible," she murmured. "Something that big doesn't just disappear." But it did, and the silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of the unknown pressed in on them, thick and heavy. Then, just as they started to regroup, the forest came alive. Something or someone was moving toward them. But what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Could this be the moment they finally come face to face with Bigfoot? Or is it something even more dangerous? Trapped in the kill zone. Mireya adjusted her thermal camera, her fingers tightening around it as she focused on the screen. For a brief second, the display flickered, static dancing across the image before it stabilized. And what she saw made her blood run cold. Red and orange silhouettes, unmistakably alive. These weren't random blurs or distorted shapes. They were deliberate, defined, and terrifyingly large. Worse, they were moving, closing in, from every direction.
Wait, are you seeing movement or are you just hearing?
No. I see movement, but I'm not picking up a heat signature.
The team froze. "Are they circling us?" someone whispered. No one answered. Mireya didn't even look up. She was too focused, too locked in, trying to process what she was seeing. The figures weren't moving aimlessly. Every step was slow, measured, and intentional. Clearly, it was a strategy, and strategy meant one thing. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a hunt. The air thickened, pressing down like the forest itself was holding its breath. Every tiny sound, every creak, every rustle felt magnified, razor sharp against the suffocating silence. Then from the left, the sharp snap of a twig. Another crack echoed behind them, The team spun, eyes scanning, but the trees stretched into endless darkness. Shadows shifted, stretching unnaturally in the dim light. Shapes flickered at the edges of their vision, but nothing solid appeared. No matter how hard they strained their eyes, they couldn't see who or what was out there. "They're toying with us," Ronnie muttered, gripping his flashlight so tight his knuckles went white. Mireya's stomach twisted. For the first time on this expedition, she wasn't sure if they were the observers or the prey. The snapping grew louder, closer, no longer just random disturbances in the brush. Whatever these things were, they weren't shy about making their presence known. Mireya's heart pounded as she swung her thermal camera toward the noise, trying to keep her hands steady. The screen flickered, then the heat signatures reappeared. Closer, too close. She tried to lock onto just one, but they were moving too fast. 1 second, a glowing mass pulsed to the right. The next, it was gone, only to reappear behind her. Her breath hitched. The team whipped around, scanning, waiting, every muscle in their bodies locked in place. And then, silence. Not the kind that brings relief. The kind that makes every nerve in your body scream, "Don't move," and that's when she heard it. A deep, guttural sound, like a low rumble laced with a hiss, vibrating through the air. Her chest tightened, instinct screaming at her to run. But what chilled her to the bone wasn't the noise itself. It was where it was coming from.
What?
Whatever that is, it is walking across the forest.
Her breath barely left her lips as she whispered, "It's above us." The team's flashlights shot up into the treetops, beams slicing through the darkness. At first there was nothing, just leaves shifting in the breeze, branches swaying as if the forest itself was breathing. And then there it was, a shadow, moving. Fast, Mireya's breath caught in her throat. The shadow moved with precision, slipping from branch to branch with a practiced ease, like it had been doing this its whole life. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight as her mind raced, struggling to process what she was seeing. She couldn't make out details, only the outline. Dark, massive, and too impossibly big to be anything she'd ever seen in the trees. Then it hit her. Was this a tactic? A distraction while the others closed in from the ground? A cold wave of realization spread through her. These creatures weren't just moving. They were thinking. Who the hell climbs trees like that? Ronnie's voice cut through the tension, low and sharp. No one answered. Mireya couldn't look away. The figure above them hesitated just for a second, as if watching them, studying them. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it melted into the canopy, vanishing into the shadows. "It knows we're here," Mireya murmured, barely audible. "It's watching us." And then came the breaking point. Something heavy dropped through the air, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Mireya's flashlight caught just a sliver of movement, a hulking, massive shadow darting into the underbrush before she could focus. Her pulse slammed in her ears. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yeah," Ronnie whispered, his voice raw. "And I really wish I didn't." Mireya's mind raced. What the hell were they dealing with?
What's going on?
Russell, I've never seen a heat signature this big, and there's at least 4 of them.
They couldn't outrun whatever this was. Not here, not in this dense, unforgiving wilderness. And if they couldn't even see it, how could they possibly defend themselves? Mireya didn't want to think about what would happen if these creatures decided to strike. "We need to move," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. But even as the words left her lips, she knew it wasn't that simple. Moving could make them look like prey. Staying still might make them easy targets. Either way, the outcome felt the same. The growls grew louder, deeper, reverberating through the trees. The snapping branches, closer now, just feet away. The forest, which had once felt vast and endless, suddenly felt impossibly small, suffocating. Mireya's eyes flicked to her team. She saw it in their faces, the fear. These were explorers, scientists, and professionals. But at this moment, none of that mattered. Right now, they were just people standing in the dark, completely exposed. And then, without warning, one of the creatures made its move. Had they just walked into an ambush? Or worse, a trap, the attack? It all happened in an instant. 1 second, Mireya was scanning the tree line, trying to steady her nerves, gripping onto the illusion of control. The next, a shadow exploded from the darkness. A massive, hulking form barreling straight toward her. For a fraction of a second, she froze. Her brain screamed at her to move, to run, to do something, but her body wouldn't listen. The creature was massive. Even in the dim light, Mireya could feel it. Raw power radiating off of it. Something primal, something terrifyingly close. "Mireya, move!" Ronnie's voice shattered the trance holding her in place. She stumbled backwards, her boots catching on a twisted root. The forest seemed to fight against her, branches clawing at her jacket, bushes coiling around her legs like they wanted to keep her there. She hit the ground hard, a sharp jolt of pain shooting through her hands as they scraped against the rough earth. But there was no time to process it. Desperation kicked in. Mireya scrambled to her feet, heart hammering like a war drum in her chest. Her fingers clawed at the strap of her pack, fumbling for the sound alarm, a last resort device meant for warding off bears. With shaking hands, she flipped the switch. A piercing, shrill wail tore through the night. It was deafening, the kind of noise that sent animals bolting in terror. Mireya braced herself, waiting for the moment the creatures would flee. And for a second, it seemed to work. The growling stopped. The forest went deathly silent. But turns out they had walked into something worse. The growls came back, louder, deeper, more aggressive than before. Mireya's stomach dropped. She gripped the alarm like it was a weapon, though she knew it meant nothing now. "That just made it worse," she whispered. And then she ran. The sounds behind her grew louder, the sharp crack of branches snapping under something heavy, something fast. Meanwhile, Ronnie was in his own fight. His grip tightened around the thermal camera, eyes locked on the screen. The flickering display showed the heat signatures of the creatures, moving, hunting. He could see Mireya's figure, a frantic blur in the chaos, but navigating through this terrain was a nightmare. "Hold on, Mireya, I'm coming!" he shouted, his voice nearly lost to the sounds of the chase. But the words felt hollow. And then through the trees, Mireya saw it, the lake. The moonlight shimmered off its surface, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness behind her. It was a beacon, a promise of safety, if she could just reach it. "Almost there," she gasped, pushing her body beyond its limits. Her legs felt like lead, her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she didn't dare look back. She didn't need to. The crashing, the guttural breaths, the heavy footfalls, they were still coming. Just as her feet hit the damp shoreline, Ronnie burst through the underbrush. His face was pale, his breaths ragged, his shirt streaked with dirt and sweat. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm, steadying her before she collapsed. "We've got to go," he said, urgency cutting through his exhaustion. But Mireya didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the tree line, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "They're still there," she whispered, and they were. For what felt like an eternity, the two of them stood frozen, staring into the shadows. The creatures weren't moving, but their presence was unmistakable. "Why aren't they coming closer?" Ronnie's voice was barely a whisper. Mireya shook her head. She had no answer. All she knew was that they had to leave. Now, they had been allowed to escape, this time. But why? Were the creatures testing them, toying with them, or worse, saving their full strength for something yet to come? Mireya collapsed near the edge of the lake, her chest heaving, lungs burning with every breath. She was safe, or as safe as she could be for now. Ronnie pulled her up, his grip steady, but his face as pale as the moon above them. "We made it," he said, but there was no relief in his voice. Slowly, their eyes drifted back to the trees. The creatures hadn't left. They were still there, just beyond the edge of the light. And then finally, they moved. Slowly, one by one, they melted back into the shadows. The forest swallowed them whole, the thick darkness erasing any trace they had ever been there. The only proof of their presence was the faint sound of snapping branches fading into the distance. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Or at least, it seemed to be. Mireya and Ronnie stood frozen, their breaths ragged, their bodies still locked in the tension of the chase. Neither of them spoke. The silence around them wasn't just empty. It was heavy. It carried the weight of what they had just survived. The questions left hanging in the air like the fog rolling over the lake. They had made it. Barely. Back at base camp, the adrenaline finally started to fade, and Mireya allowed herself to collapse into a chair. She stared at her hands, still trembling. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "They weren't just big, they were smart. They were hunting us." The words hung in the air, unsettling in their certainty. She took a slow, shaky breath, trying to steady herself as the rest of the team gathered around, scrolling through footage, scanning thermal images, replaying audio clips. What they had captured was extraordinary. The heat signatures were clear, the sounds undeniable. But was it proof? Not quite. Was it Bigfoot? Ronnie finally asked, his voice breaking the uneasy silence. No one answered. Mireya didn't know what to say. For centuries, people have claimed to see creatures like these, massive, shadowy beings moving through the forest, always just out of reach. Some call them Bigfoot. Others dismiss them as myths, old stories meant to explain the unexplainable. But after what she had just experienced, the line between myth and reality had never felt so thin. Could these creatures truly be Bigfoot? Or was it something else entirely? Something even more mysterious? For now, the team would regroup, analyze the data, plan their next steps. The forest had given them a glimpse of its secrets, but Mireya knew it wasn't done with them yet. Because as terrifying as that night had been, she knew she would return. How could she not? The mystery was too big to walk away from. But one question still haunted her. If she went back, would they let her walk away a second time? Were those creatures really Bigfoot? Or was it something even stranger? And after everything she's been through, will Mireya dare to go back? What do you think? Did this bring us one step closer to proving Bigfoot is real? Or is the mystery still out there waiting to be uncovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more thrilling adventures. Who knows? Maybe next time we'll get even closer to the truth.